Hello, this is Sandy. Today, let's talk about preserving your history by writing letters. Happy New Year! Let's start with a bang with Rachmaninoff by Noodlers. This is a beautiful fountain pen ink, and it's a little bit of a mutant ink. We'll talk about some really interesting characteristics. This is a pure bubblegum, I almost said flavor, a pure bubblegum color. It is really interesting. It's a very flat color. There is no shimmer. There's no sheen. It is pure, pure pink. You will see no other colors trying to come to the surface here. Let's take a look at my ink journal. On the left-hand side, you'll see three swatches. At the top left, a 160 GSM Artist Loft sketch paper. Next to that, 190 GSM Strathmore sketch paper, and then beneath that, a common index card. At the top of each card, I completely saturate the ink, multiple layers at the top, and then I draw down beneath that in a thin layer using a cotton swab, just to show the contrast between the layers. And here, this is a really stable ink, probably not too good for shading. And then beneath that, you'll see where I've dropped some drops of ink and then thinned it out with water. This is where it gets really interesting. This ink not only immediately dries when it hits the paper, and I mean immediately dries, but it also soaks through. All the different kinds of papers I tried, it soaked through. I should clarify, it did not soak through the notebook page, which is a Hobonichi notebook with Tomoe River paper, so it did not soak through the notebook. You can appreciate here how consistent the ink color is. It's very stable. Now, when you look at the water tests on each swatch, you'll notice that the initial blotch of ink is very dark. And that's because the ink dried as soon as it hit the swatch. So on the Strathmore paper here, you can see that the ink dried so quickly that when I added water, there was nothing to pull across the swatch. The ink completely resisted the water. And spoilers, we'll see a little more of that characteristic later. And here on the index card, you'll see the same. The ink soaked through the paper. The paper just drinks this ink. The ink binds to the paper. You almost expect this ink to smell like bubblegum. Now let's take a look at the 100% cotton note card. At the top of this card, I completely saturated it with the ink. I feel like this gives the true color of the ink, completely saturated. Now let's look at the right side of the journal. You'll see near the top where I took a cotton swab and just swabbed the ink. You can see a little bit of layering, but not much. Again, this is a deep, I'd call it an opaque ink. There is no transparency here. Then you'll see the line underneath. Again, maybe a tiny bit of shading, but it's pretty opaque. The writing is very stable. And again, this ink dries so fast. The cotton note card square, again, shows the saturation. And the square beneath that, the bright white paper, shows how immovable this ink is when it hits the paper. You can see I couldn't even move the ink around the paper, so you see a little bit of the layering there. The UV test, 4 weeks in my southwest facing window, almost no fade. This is a pretty hardy, amazing ink. The water test, again, demonstrated that this ink is just pink. No yellows, no blues, no purples, nothing else coming out of this ink but pink. And of course, the chromatography strip showed the same. Now let's put this amazing ink to good use by writing a letter. Remember, as genealogists, historians, researchers, one of the most important, maybe the most important thing we do is to preserve our own history, to leave behind something for future generations. And a great way to do that is to write letters. Here's an idea for writing a letter. Why not write a short letter describing all of your favorite sweets? I wrote 2 identical letters, and I soaked one of them in cold water for 30 seconds and then rinsed the letter. And here is the result. Well, I think we knew what to expect here. This unbelievable ink gripped onto the paper and didn't want to leave. This ink has a very high degree of water resistance. Now, how will it do against a highlighter? If you're like me, you love your fountain pens and you love to use a highlighter. So let's test this ink against a regular liquid yellow highlighter. And again, I think this is what we might have expected. This ink completely holds up to a highlighter. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy my other videos discussing ways that you can preserve your history, as well as research methodologies and primary sources for your research. I wish you all the best in your research. Treat yourself to a sweet. Take care.